Jeremy Wallace, political reporter at the Houston Chronicle and also the San Antonio Express News. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we get to see each other occasionally at the big events, and so it's nice talking with you. So let's talk about the race involving the Speaker of the House, Dade Phelan. Is this not the biggest political story in Texas right now? The fact that he's in a runoff and he's fighting for his political career?
Yeah, the implications of this are immense. If he loses this seat, what this means for Southeast Texas, what it means for the entire Texas legislature, and what it means for future legislation, all hangs in the balance. It's really a significant problem here for Dade Phelan and his supporters. You have to go over 50 years since we've had a leadership shakeup like this. And what this does is people have to understand that this goes beyond just like, okay, so who's going to be the leader of the House? What this does is it changes who sets up all the committee chairmen, in the Texas legislature. You're talking about 43 different committees who could have new leaders, directing legislation. That means a whole new list of issues for lobbyists to kind of deal with. There's a lot going on here that they're going to have to really like this has so much impact potentially.
And it was interesting because I spoke with at least one conservative House member in our area, North Texas, and he said, look, the House is run right now, it's member centric. The Speaker really doesn't put his thumb on an issue. If there is a change, that could happen, right? Where you have a much more involved speaker in the day-to-day bills and how they progress. Isn't that right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that the character of who the speaker is significant, right? If this if you get an all Republican based leader, and you get somebody who wants to rule kind of with an iron fist, you could have that. We've had that in Texas history before. It hasn't always ended well, but you can have a much more aggressive, leader, and then they will start dictating everything that goes on. Like you said, with Dade Phelan and even his predecessors, members still had a lot of influence over what decisions were made to have things come through. But imagine the House acting more like the Senate. And what I mean by that is Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who runs the Senate, like nothing happens without his approval. Like everything has to go through him. And we could have a situation where the next leader of the Texas House is also like that. So that puts us closer to, one of the thoughts of, legislative processes becoming three men in a room type thing. And what I mean is like all of a sudden you have the leader of the Senate, the leader of the House, and the governor dictating everything. And so members lose a lot more of their ability to kind of freelance. And so I think that's what, again, depending on who gets elected as the speaker, we don't even if Dade Phelan loses this or wins, it's like we're not sure if he'll be back as the speaker. So there's a potential shakeup no matter what happens up in Beaumont. But certainly if he loses, now it's open audition time for what kind of speaker does the Texas legislature want, and what kind of speaker do Republicans who are expected to be in the majority want. It's like those types of things are going to be, kind of in conflict at times. Because one thing we also kind of know is look, it takes 100 votes to get a lot of pieces of legislation through. You need some buy-in from Democrats on some big picture issues. If you ice them out of all of the different committee chairmanships, like some Republicans have asked for, you now create an additional tension within the House. Remember that the Republicans don't have such an overwhelming majority in the House. It was just a couple years ago. They lost 12 seats in one election cycle. And now we're looking at a 9-seat majority. And that could, get smaller with this election cycle. So they have less wiggle room, and they do need Democratic support to get some things through, no matter who the speaker is going to be.
And I wanted to ask you about Dade Phelan himself. The Phelan name in Beaumont and in Southeast Texas is historic. His family. And so I'm wondering, talk to me a little bit about that and the fact, will that be able to rescue him this time around?
Well, it's going to have to be, right? What Dade Phelan has, and really the Phelan name they have this ability to say, look, Beaumont is almost always shut out of statewide politics. We don't have the control and the power. We don't have, there aren't a lot of Beaumont Republicans and or Democrats who have led either the Senate or the House or the governor's office. And so here they actually have a major influential person in the Texas legislature. And if Dade Phelan goes down, that goes away. It's like, and I think that's the message he has to get through to the Chamber of Commerce type supporters, the people who are worried about the economics of Beaumont, the unemployment issues, the types of issues they deal with that are very different from the rest of the state. Think about like, they have a crawfish industry that is like struggling. It's like they need somebody who can kind of negotiate on that stuff, work on those agriculture issues, who understands that stuff. And he does. And like if Beaumont loses that, they all of a sudden lose a lot of influence and pull in statewide legislature, issues. And so I think that becomes a significant player. Even think of issues like gambling, right? It's like Beaumont is so close to getting into Louisiana. What does the whole gambling picture look like if Dade Phelan, a guy from Beaumont, doesn't have some sort of control of the lever there? It's like now all of a sudden you get a totally different vantage point, particularly again on so many issues. It's like once you change a speaker, it's like you're completely changing the direction of the Texas House potentially, and centering the negotiations points with both the Texas Senate and with the governor's office. That's a lot of uncertainty going into the next legislative cycle. If Dade Phelan is no longer the man.
And in covering him, has he made that case in the sense of, I mean, you've got Phelan Boulevard, you've got Phelan Plaza there in Beaumont. And I mean, has he made that case?
Yeah, absolutely. You can see he's really been pushing that. He's been really working on the chamber type Republicans, really trying to get them out to vote. The one thing we do know, it's like, look, it's a runoff election. The turnout's going to be small. So they know there's less than 30,000 people who will decide this. They've got to make sure they're on the doorsteps of their people over and over again. They got to be in their mailboxes. It's not about the TV ads. It's about, can you get that person out of their house to that polling spot? And I think the one thing that really helps Dade, he's been around the political world for a long time. He knows how to get that part done. It's like he's run, races before. He's been involved in other races, not just in his own area, but other parts of the state. So he knows the blocking and tackling part of this is more crucial than any race ever when you get into a runoff, because again, it's a limited audience. You're not going to get, an average Republican voter in a presidential cycle to come out. You're going to get a hardcore, primary voter who never misses an election. You got to get those people to your, ballot and voting for Dade Phelan and making that case that, hey, if we lose this seat, we lose so much economic power that Beaumont has been left out of for most of the last 50 years. Do you really want that to happen? And I think there's a lot of Republicans who are like, yeah, we do. We're okay with that because we want a more aggressive culture war type Republican leading the chamber like Dan Patrick. If we to trade those two things off in Beaumont, that is the big question. What are you willing to give up? You're going to give up one of those things. And it's like, that's what the voter in Beaumont, all 30,000 of them, potentially. That's a high number, too. It's like,
Right.
I'd be surprised if we even get to that 30,000 number. That's what voted in the primary during the March primary. If you can get all those people out after Memorial Day weekend, to vote in a primary, that's tough work. This is the real part where campaign consultants and strategists will make their money.
Has David Covey given substantial interviews where he's asked about his positions? And is this so much a question of where he is on the positions versus he's not Dade Phelan?
Yeah, exactly. I think you just hit it. He avoided those interviews for the longest time with this mindset of, look, there's Dade Phelan and then there's the other choice. And he wanted to be that other choice. When you're going against an incumbent, particularly in a runoff, that becomes really critical, right? That's where it's like anybody but the incumbent already won the first round. And it's like he's just got to make that case again. And what I mean is like Dade Phelan didn't get the 50%. So that tells you there's a problem, right? And so Covey just has to kind of reiterate that and not get into any problems. that means limiting your interviews. Like he's done a few more recently, but he's certainly limited his interviews so he doesn't provide more material out there. Because anytime you say something, your opponent can take it and turn it how they need to, right? It can be just a slight, wording issue. If you say something, pro Trump or pro NRA, it's like all of a sudden it gets you into a different situation. But so yeah, I think absolutely Covey's been doing a few more interviews, not a lot, hasn't given a lot of material. And so the voter still has to make this decision off of less information of who is David Covey, potentially what his positions are. And it's more that straight up question of, do you want Dade Phelan or do you want somebody else? And that somebody else won't be the leader of the Texas House.
And then I wanted to ask you just about the overall picture, because in the Texas House, we've had 9 Republican incumbents already lose their seats on March 5th, and now another 8 are in runoffs. And so we're talking about potentially 17, not to mention the incumbents who decided they're done and didn't run for reelection. You've covered the Texas legislature for a while. I've covered it. I don't remember a time where the Texas House GOP has been in such play. Do you?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a massive amount of turnover, no matter what happens, right? Like you mentioned, there are a lot of retirements. There's a lot of members who won't be coming back. That in and of itself already changes, the calculus in trying to figure out what is the Texas House going to see as important in this next legislative session. It's like that's already changing before our very eyes, even before we know what happens to Dade Phelan. So like it's change upon change upon change is what we're kind of looking at. And like I think one of the big winners in this is going to be both potentially Governor Abbott and Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor. Both of them will have a chance to assert their dominance kind of over this new legislative arm, essentially. It's like, everything about the Texas House could be different. And that just puts those other two in a better position to negotiate, particularly if they can come to terms on some things. If they both agree on school, vouchers and school choice issues, they can make that case to the House and help kind of, craft that legislation. Same thing with issues like gambling, guns. You think of anything you can think of, those two will have an advantage over, potentially, I'm assuming a rookie House Speaker with a much changed Republican base of support within the House. So that's a lot of change going on, and I'm not sure I've seen this. Going back. I think maybe back when I was a kid, there was some turnover when the Democrats were switching over to Republican in the legislature. It's like that was like a 20-year period of time that has slowly kind of happened. But this is happening in really just a couple of cycles. You think about like the amount of change we're seeing in the legislative process. If you take a step back, like so many House members will have changed over in the last 4 to 5 years. As like, and you're going to have potentially yet another speaker change. Remember, we just changed speakers 2 other times here. It's like we've been through, Strauss and Bonin, and now, Dade Phelan could be out. We could be on to our 4th one, all in a very short window. When you think there have been times where we've gone 10, 15 years with the same speaker, and now here we are, we're just changing them out like our socks at this point, like every couple of years, we're going to change those guys out. They're going to have a whole new bunch of members. And it kind of speaks to the politics a little bit of the day, right? I think we've seen this in the congressional delegation too. We were the most stable congressional delegation for the longest time. You had guys that were there for so long that they became, leaders and chairmen of committees and things like that. But we've had so much turnover, in both the legislature and the congressional, delegation that it just opens up like all kinds of seats. So we have a lot younger people, not younger in terms of age, but in their seniority involved in the process. So they haven't been through the same battles. And that creates conflict with the people who have been through the battles, who have been around for a while. So you have some members who have been in there since the 1980s and 90s, who will be sitting there watching these new people come in and have to say, wait, we don't do it that way. And the answer is going to be, well, why not? And you can kind of see that's how David Covey's almost run his campaign. It's like, we're just going to change things up. It's like the old way isn't good enough. So, and again, does Beaumont get its fair shake out of that? I just don't know.
And my last question to you, and I appreciate the time, and that is the fight going on over the Texas GOP chair. Matt Rinaldi is announced a while back he's not running for re-election, and so now I think there are up to 7 candidates in this race. And the big names are Abraham George, the former Collin County GOP chair, who's backed by Rinaldi, backed by AG Ken Paxton, and then also the Travis County GOP chair, Matt Makoviak. What do you make of this race?
Yeah, and talking about exclamation point on what we were just talking about with all the change, like the Republican Party of Texas has been going through chairman pretty quickly too, right? We've gone a couple of cycles now where they keep changing out people, and so here we are, more change within the Republican Party. This battle, like what's different about this is that the delegates who make the choice who can be the chairman, there's just so few of them, right? Like this is the Republican. These are the people who on their weekends spend time going to committee meetings. So it's not like a general, you know, Republican, getting a choice here. We're talking about probably Republicans who are the right of most Republicans. And so they have a lot of influence in this process and carry a lot of weight into this thing. So, that endorsement from Paxton is going to matter. It's like, if you get endorsements from Paxton and Dan Patrick, you can get pretty far down the road. The thing that helps Makoviak in this stuff is like he's been around for a while. It's like he's built relationships with all of these folks. And like he's been known to, publicly, defend and support most of the Republicans who are elected statewide in national media. And they notice that, but there's one thing you can count on. Politicians see their clippings, right? They know when their name is in the Washington Post and New York Times and Makoviak is saying good things about them. They make notes of those things. They remember that. And so he's going to have some ability to kind of maybe, reach out to some of those legislators to kind of have some influence. And it probably helps that he's been a chairman, as long as he has. Like that helps you be part of the rank and file. A lot of these fights for these for these chairmanship positions become this battle. The way it was phrased to me one time was the electeds versus the grassroots. And Makoviak, and so they have some distrust of the electeds. They don't think they understand what they're going through and the amount of work they put in to help the elected officials. And so there's a chance that Makoviak, even though he's not an elected official himself, he can maybe influence some people by, look, I've been in the trenches with you. It's like I know what it takes to kind of get these committee meetings going, to make sure everybody's happy, to work on the seating charts and all that kind of stuff, all the not so glamorous parts of being a chairman of the party. And most importantly, I think his biggest message is money. Who can raise some money? The Republican Party of Texas has really struggled to raise money over the last couple of years, which blows your mind, right? This is such a Republican state. Republicans have solidified their strength over these last 6 to 8 years. And yet the finances of the party are in trouble. Like they're certainly not what they used to be. And like they have a hard time being influential. It's not like a lot of other states. In a lot of other states, governors work with their parties, hand in glove. Not in this state. Governor Abbott pretty much does his own campaigning. He has his own $41 million campaign account that just makes the Republican Party look like petty cash. It's like they don't have that ability to kind of work together as one unit, as you've seen a lot of other states. So I'll be interested to see if Makoviak were to win this thing. Does he become more of an asset and somebody who can help the governor and other statewide officials, and vice versa? That's when you start seeing them kind of like bring the party back together as one more unit versus all these civil wars that we have. It's like I don't know if I've ever seen the Republican Party in Texas have more internal battles more publicly. Look, they've been battles before. Anytime you have a big party, you're going to have fights.
Right.
But I think what's happened here is that you have so much internal feuding over, the who's going to be the House Speaker, the House versus the Senate, the governor versus all of them. You have party members, Rinaldi versus other Republicans. It's like all this internal fighting. At some point, if the Republican can kind of figure out, okay, let's all kind of get together on the same page here and like just focus on making sure these Democratic gains that they've made don't keep going. It's like what a totally different, perspective. I think that's the message Makoviak, if he can kind of break through, it'll show kind of a different approach to the Republican Party. But these last two chairmen show us that may not be what people want. They went from Alan West to Matt Rinaldi. These aren't unifiers. These are people who are like, you're not as pure as we are as Republicans. If they go with another round of that, I'm not sure where the party will be. And I don't know if this conflict we see continually within the Republican, this Republican or Republican blood I like to talk about, is like that's going to continue, potentially depending on who they pick as chairman.
Jeremy Wallace, political reporter for the Houston Chronicle and San Antonio Express News. Thank you so much. Great conversation.
Thanks for having me on, Jack.